Hello, everybody. Welcome. There's not very much good to say about this pandemic, but one of the great things is finally allowed me to work in events with my very good friend and colleague Cheryl from the Chorleywood Bookshop. So I'm here to say hello and thanks to everybody from Dulwich who booked. We're delighted to be working with Cheryl, and she's going to be our host for this evening. So I'm going to hand over to her now. Cheryl.
Hello and good evening, everybody, and thanks, Hazel. Good evening and welcome to our evening with Tom Watson. As Hazel said, this event is a collaboration between Chorleywood Bookshop and Village Books in Dulwich, and we'd be delighted to be working with Hazel. This is our first event of 2021. Just a little bit of housekeeping. The event will last for approximately an hour. I'll be chatting to Tom for about 40-45 minutes. Then we'll be taking questions from the audience to put to Tom. If you'd like to put a question to Tom, if you could do it through the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to say where you're from, that'd be lovely too. I'm always interested which part of the world everyone's from. Be really good. So, Tom, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and welcome. And I know you're going to be telling us more about your book, Downsizing. An astonishing feat, losing 8 stone and reversing your type 2 diabetes. Can you tell us a bit about what led to your big lifestyle change?
Cheryl, firstly, thank you for hosting tonight. It's a great initiative. I weep for Britain's bookshops, but I'm glad that the independent sector is fighting back. And it's great to see 57 participants in this meeting who've signed on not to do a Zoom quiz, which because they're doing my head in. So welcome everyone, and thanks for that question. And I guess really my story is a bit of an everyman story, really. I turned 50. I'd been piling on the pounds for 30 years. I'd sublimated everything into my career, and I was in denial about my health. And I became 22 stone, so I got hypertension. I was morbidly obese. I had type 2 diabetes. And I'd quelled the inner whisper that became an inner shout that I needed to sort myself out, and the voice said to me that I was going to die. And so it took me. I suppressed that conversation with myself for many years until I could no longer, get away with that. Mm. And I spent a lot of time researching my condition, and I was very pleasant. What really helped me was I read one of Michael Mosley's books on a Kindle while I was away for a long weekend. And the great thing about reading it on a Kindle is you can click through on the footnotes to all the research papers, and that's how I started a journey looking into this in some detail. And I eventually sort of found the mental switch in my head to put to on. And then very quickly I reversed my condition. And it was such a liberating experience. The cognitive gains are the things that you get the most. But because then I was a sort of elected representative, I felt responsible because I wanted everyone to, I wanted everyone to feel the joy that I felt of reversing my condition, which I didn't know was reversible. And actually it's my birthday tomorrow. So, this all kind of came to a point after my 50th birthday. And I'm 54 tomorrow. And I look back now and I feel like I'm looking back at a different person's life. Such is the difference. And I know I'm waffling now, but that's because I'm an ex-politician. But the one thing to tell you is I think there are, of the 3.5 million identified people with type 2 diabetes in Britain, the research suggests that at least 2 million of those can get off their meds and reverse the condition. And it's like getting out of prison. You get your mental focus back, you get your physical health back, you get your sleep back. And I feel if I've got any mission left in public life, it's to try and help those 2 million people rid themselves of their diabetic medication.
Was it the same for the hypertension? Were you able to come off the hypertension medication as well? 'Cause it says
Mainly. Yeah, I've got a genetic in my family. There's a sort of, we're predisposed to that. But I reduced that medication very, very dramatically. And actually, you see, there's all these telltale signs. You don't just get diabetes, type 2 diabetes. In fact, what you realise is when you read into it, you're sort of your insulin resistance just means you find it harder to process glucose in your blood over time. And there are all these warning signals before you actually are medicated. A good 5, 6, 7 years before you hit type 2 diabetes, there are alarm bells ringing in your physiology that can be spotted earlier. And so one of the things I say in the book, and I keep pestering Matthew Hancock on this, although he's obviously very busy dealing with the global pandemic right now. When I presented to my doctor as obese, which is a good 20 years ago, or when my doctor essentially forced me into weighing myself in his surgery, had I been offered a continuous glucose monitor then, which is one of those little patches you can wear on your arm that approximates your blood sugar levels, I would have seen the data spike on my phone for when I drank a bottle of Coke on a Saturday morning after I'd woken up after a night in the pub and a curry or a pizza on the way home, and seen what a blood sugar spike looks like on an iPhone. Obviously 20 years ago, the iPhones didn't exist, but effectively, if you have that earlier intervention, I think it would have a dramatic impact on behavioural change, and so I've been sort of, one of the things I think in public policy terms we need to do is have a much clearer intervention path when people just get heavy before they start getting hypertension and pre-diabetic.
So was there a significant turning point? I know you're going to share a reading with us, and I don't know if that particular reading was the turning point, or was that was the thing, if it, or was there something else really?
There's no one moment. I mean, the moment I'm going to read, I've never done, by the way, I apologise in advance to everyone, I've never done a reading of my own book before, right? I know that's crazy because I've done lots of events, so if I do this terribly, it's like I shouldn't practice. But it was a very nice clinician caught me at a Christmas party and basically told me, he looked at me and he thought I was diabetic, which was a bit of a shock. And I'll do the reading on that. But there were other points. There are sort of moments of misery that if you were really wanted to deal with it, you could, like not being able to fit into a Marks and Spencer suit anymore because you're so overweight, or even when I was diagnosed with type 2, when I got the blood sugar, when I got the test results, I was immediately medicalised and prescribed metformin. I just went into denial about it. I didn't tell anyone I'd got diabetes for quite a while because there's quite a stigma to it. There's quite a shame to it. And about 1 in 20 people has probably got type 2 diabetes, and more undiagnosed. But if you go into a route, I mean, that probably suggests what we'll have a fair few people with type 2 on this call, I would have thought. I'm not going to ask people to say if they've got it, but if you ask people directly, they would deny it. And so I think that there were just points like that. What really did it for me, though, is I've got 2 young kids. Well, they're 15 and 12 now. They're not so young anymore, but I wanted to live for them, and I until I reached a point where I thought I would die early. I wanted to live for my kids. That's really what did it, and I still want to live for my kids. And I still have very great regrets that I was unhealthy, not to be able to be as an active as dad as I should have been when they were a lot younger. And the slight downside of that now at the age of nearly 54 is I have to make up for it, and which required me to go to things like Go Ape with my 12-year-old daughter and fly off zip wires, which is terrifying. And if you watched that ITV programme last year that when I rode the length of Britain, they had me doing a lot of things on ropes that made me cry like a baby.
So do you want to do that reading now, Tom? I know
Sure,
you
okay, yeah, okay. So the setting is I'm in a pub in London. An old friend's come back from America and she's having a Christmas party. The place was full of familiar faces, including a clutch of MPs and civil servants. With a pint of Guinness in one hand and a pork pie in the other, I found myself chatting with a workmate's husband, a consultant dermatologist by the name of Dr. Sunil Chopra. I'd never really spoken to him at length before, but I found him to be really interested and engaging. He told me all about his research work, notably the development of an ointment to treat basal cell carcinoma, one of the world's most prevalent cancers. All being well, it'll have the potential to save thousands of lives, he said. That's incredible, I replied. Sounds like you've made a great breakthrough. Sunil then quizzed me about the various parliamentaries goings on, including my involvement in the News International phone hacking inquiry that had taken place that year. Loved the way you took the Murdochs to task, he smiled. He was referring to the Commons Culture Media Sports Select Committee meeting that I'd spearheaded in the midst of the scandal. I got a copy of the final News of the World framed on my office in Westminster, I said, smiling back. Can't say that I miss it. Dr. Chopra and I continued chatting for a few minutes until our conversation hit a slight lull. I'm still cringing as I get to this point. I notice him nervously running his hand through his hair as if something was vexing him. Everything all right, I asked. Listen, Tom, I've really enjoyed speaking with you, he said, lowering his voice to a near whisper. But there's something else I'd like to discuss if you don't mind. Go ahead, I replied, assuming he was going to ask me about the Tory government's cuts to medical research or something along those lines. There's no easy way of saying this, he went on, taking a deep breath, but I have a feeling you may be diabetic. What the hell? Yelled a voice in my head as I took a few moments to process this bolt from the blue. Sunil, meanwhile, shifted uneasily from one foot to the other. I know I may be stepping out of line here, he said, but I'm just a little worried that you could... Hang on a minute, I interrupted a little testily. You're assuming that just by looking at me, I mean, I know I'm overweight, but I'm a medic, Tom, and I just happen to know a bit about type 2 diabetes, he said, offering me a sympathetic smile. My hunch could be wrong, I hope it is, but I really think you need to get yourself checked out. Maybe we should go somewhere a little more private, I replied, mindful of the eavesdroppers in this pub full of revellers. I'd been a parliamentarian long enough to know how quickly gossip could spread through Westminster. So in a quiet corner away from the hubbub, Sunil outlined the various markers that had triggered his diabetes radar. He began, perhaps unsurprisingly, with my chunky frame, which, as per usual, was clad in a black baggy suit. I rarely weighed myself, but I guessed I was edging towards 22 stone. That's 140 kilograms. I cringed slightly as Sunil suggested that my solid pot belly could be an indicator of the excess deep abdominal fat, so-called visceral fat, a small amount of which normally surrounds the vital organs such as the liver and pancreas. This condition often pointed towards insulin insensitivity, he explained, which was a precursor to developing type 2 diabetes. My frequent trips to the loo that evening, probably averaging about 3 an hour, had also given him cause for concern. I hadn't realised he was keeping a toilet tally, I told him, and he was worried about my general appearance too, blushing slightly as he described me as a little bit clabby looking. He was spot on, to be fair. I never went anywhere without a pocket handkerchief to dab my damp brow. While Sunil reeled off a litany of diabetes indicators as the strains of Jingle Bell Rock floated across the pub, I actually felt a little sorry for him. Informing a relative stranger that he might be suffering with a serious, life-changing disease can't have been an easy thing to do in the circumstances. Mince pie, anyone? Said Leanne, smiling as she approached us with a large platter of festive nibbles. I took this as my cue to bring our chat to a close. Certainly not the kind of conversation I expected to have at a Christmas party, Sunil, I said, firmly shaking his hand, but maybe I should thank you for being so honest. Just get yourself booked in for that blood test, he replied, perhaps relieved that I hadn't told him to back off and mind his own business. And if I were you, I'd do it sooner rather than later.
Very good. Yes. Well, So you're grateful to him, obviously, in the long run.
I'm extremely grateful to him. I mean, I think he made an intervention that really significantly changed my life. And you know, the generosity of strangers and all that, but it was almost serendipitous. That it was just the nudge I kind of needed, even though I didn't act for some years after that moment.
So how much do you think your life as a politician contributed to this unhealthy lifestyle?
That's a really good question, that, Cheryl. I mean, it was obviously, I had a very demanding and high profile job. And you know, there's no real off switch with when you're an MP. You know, there's no core hours. You can't shut the door when you get home. The phone's always ringing. So I guess that's a little bit of it. But now that I've had the sort of time to reflect, I just, you know, I think that was really an excuse. I was in denial about my condition, and I used the job as a way of not having that conversation with myself for a long time. In fact, actually, when I did begin to address my sort of physical health, in the end, my team, who to start with were quite irritated that I was taking time to walk 10,000 steps a day in Kennington Park, or just find time to do physical exercise, which interfered with my diary. In the end, they were very pleased with the outcome, because they said I was more attentive and productive in the time they did have me in meetings, which is kind of obvious, isn't it? But it's kind of obvious in hindsight. At the time, it didn't feel like that. So, I mean, it's certainly, you know, there were a lot of demands on my time, but there's nothing more important than your health. So, and in the end, I managed to find a way through that.
Do you still exercise quite a lot? Or?
I definitely exercise, and it's funny because whereas before I was kind of set myself little mini targets, and still do that if I, you know, like you sort of reset and you do little, you know, try and shake it up a bit. But for me, what I realised, if you could say, sort of in the maintenance phase, is very often that can be sort of unhelpful, because the goal is an active life, right? The goal is to wake up in the morning, jump out of bed, and love every minute of the day. And if you're thinking, I've got to reach my target today, it kind of puts you off. So what I've got, although having said that, I've now got a group of friends. In fact, we call ourselves the POP Club, which stands for, we think it stands for Persons of Positivity, but we can't work out what it means. But it's essentially a group of people of a certain age supporting each other to live more active lives. And we did this mad thing in November where we challenged each other to run 5 kilometers a day, every day for November. And I think I managed 26 out of the 30 other days, but it half killed me. And then in December, I did very little of running, partly as a reaction to that. And what I realized was, you know, if you set yourself these exacting targets, you set yourself up to fail. And what you need to do is just keep active. But when I first started, I couldn't just do that. I needed to measure everything I did. And my first target actually was it was only 5,000 steps a day. And I think the average steps that people take is about 7,000. But even 5,000 was quite a stretch for me. And I rather foolishly gave myself one more rule, which was walk up every set of steps you come to and don't take the lift. And that was okay, because I had this great office and right under Big Ben in the House of Commons. But about 3 days after I set that rule, I got a note from the speaker to say we're going to refurbish the Big Ben clock, so you've got to move. And they moved me to an office where it was like 72 steps to my office. And the first day I walked up these steps, I thought I had to stop halfway up. I thought I needed oxygen. There was a little level halfway up. But that really, in the end, in fact, I did an interview a few months back. I missed those steps because that became my kind of I measured my sort of physical health on the basis of how exhausted I was by the time I got to the top of the steps. And by the time I stood down, I was I wasn't quite running up them, but I was, I had a spring in my step when I was going up them.
Brilliant. So, what inspired you to write Downsizing?
Well, there were two things really. I mean, the first is I met a really interesting man called Dan who said that if you've got type 2 diabetes and you're in public office, you've actually got a duty to try and explain, to get people, you should find the confidence to talk about the condition because you can help other people. But actually, the moment where it all came together was I was doing an interview on Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan and Susanna Reeves. And they were asking about weight loss and health and type 2. And at the end, Susanna Reeves said, are you writing a book about this? And I kind of said, no. But then a very enterprising agent called Rory rang me and said, I was feeding my baby this morning. I saw you on Breakfast Telly. You should write that down. And then he put me in touch with the very good people at Kyle Books, who are a great team. And they kind of paired me off with Joe Lake, who's a brilliant co-writer, and then we just went going. And in the end, the hardest thing was to trim the book down because you can tell that I can occasionally waffle on if there's something I'm interested in. So we had to sort of cut a lot of it out. But I just felt it needed. I just felt there were a lot of people who made. What I didn't want to do was preach to anyone. So if you read the book, you'll realise I'm not telling people what to do or how to lose weight. I'm very clear. I'm just explaining how I did it and what worked for me. And if I'm trying to say one thing, it's that people, you've got to find your own way. But the benefits of putting in the effort to do that are so great. It's worth it. You're liberated, really.
So how did you sort of start with this weight loss? What sort of diet did you actually do to kickstart it all? Because it was a lot of weight to lose. And over what period of time did you actually lose it?
So at the start of the book, I'd basically, I'd have half-hearted attempts every so often at losing weight over about 25 years. And I'd list some of the things. I mean, the one where, what I actually did when I started the writing process, I emailed all my friends and said, I've lost some weight. You probably don't know anything. You probably won't remember anything. But if you've got any memories of me eating that you think would be useful for this book, let me know. Right? And my inbox went into meltdown. Right? There were just like 1,000 incidents of like eating 3 curries on a Friday night, or all these terrible stories. And my friend Kathy, who used to work with me, reminded me when I did the cabbage soup diet because I'd got a wedding suit made, and I couldn't. A month before, I'd had so many stag do's that I literally couldn't fit into this suit a month before I was due to be married. So I went on the cabbage soup diet, which was like, that's about the most catastrophic diet you could ever go on if you want a social life. Anyway, so I hope, but when I committed to this, I read a lot of nutritional science, and I really weighed up what path to take. At one, I'd read the research studies out of Newcastle University to see whether I should try an ultra low calorie diet as a specific targeting of type 2, but I chose not to do that. Because I just didn't think you could. I was worried about maintenance. I thought I could probably find discipline for 3 months to do it, but what do I do after that? If I had rapid weight loss, would I just put it back on again? And in the end, after another serendipitous conversation with the meteorologist Claire Nazir, who talked to me about ketogenic nutrition, I went down that route. Which people on the call will probably know is a very low carbohydrate diet. But for me, what it really represented was eating real food, not processed food. Right, finding time in my diary to buy the right food and prepare the right food, rather than getting deliveries and microwave meals. And so, these days, if I have a chicken curry, it doesn't come from Deliveroo. I'll make it myself, and I'll use cauliflower rice rather than, boiling the bag rice or whatever. And so yes, I started with keto, and then morphed into what people would know as the Mediterranean diet, which is lots of veg, lots of olive oil, lovely, beautiful organic grass-fed butter, not being worried about good fats in the diet like I had been for 30 years. And actually, when I had this kind of ceremony where I cleared everything, all the bad stuff out of the flat I was in London, and that's bin liners full of hidden carbs, almost like hidden in case I'd run out of a sugar rush foods. And when I committed to it, the first week I lost £1 a day for a week, and just felt totally liberated. But more importantly, even after a week, I was getting my, at the time it wouldn't be unusual to go to the bathroom in the evening 2 or 3 times. When you type 2, that quite often happens. Even after the first week, I was finding I was sleeping better and longer, and having deeper sleep, which was restorative in itself. And I think I probably got my blood sugars into good order within about 4 to 6 weeks. So on the finger prick test, I could see the numbers were coming down, but I didn't want to say anything publicly until my GP had tested me with what they call the HbA1c test, which is the thing that looks at your long-term blood sugars. And after a year of getting my blood sugars in the right range, I went public about it. But the results were dramatic very early on, if you've got different measurements than just weight loss. And the weight loss was good as well, but I think for me, blood sugar levels, my blood pressure was coming down, and even better, my sleep improved. And I've described it was like a lifting of brain fog. My mental acuity sharpened. I had a better recall of facts. I could remember names more. I could concentrate deeper and longer in meetings. And I didn't realise, but I'd had a bit of a reputation for drifting off in meeting. I mean, if you're in the Labour Party shadow cabinet for the last 5 years, I hope people forgive me for drifting off occasionally, because they were really hard work, some of these meetings. But I was particularly good at drifting off, and that's basically because your brain is not functioning right. And when I changed my nutrition, I really sharpened up.
So how long did it take you to lose the majority? That's.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. That's my an ex-politician's trick of not.
Yeah, answer the question.
A dramatic amount of weight came off very quickly. But I basically lost £100 in a year, and on the graph it kept going down and down and down every week for a year, and that's the other great thing about. I mean, I tried to bank wins, right? I read a lot of Aristotle during all of this. I read Edith Hall's book, Aristotle's Way, and Aristotle gave us habits, right? He's the guy who gave us repeated behavior becoming habits. He's been described as the first self-help guru, right? And I love him, and I love his legacy. He's much better than the Stoics, right? And so I try to set up these little habits, and one of the habits I tried to do was reward myself with that thing about the internal voice that I'd been. Do I sound mad on this call, by the way? No. Tell me if I'm sounding crazy, right? But the internal that denial I'd had for so long, where I refused to have the conversation with myself about my health, I made myself have that conversation. And one of the great things about this was banking the wins. You've had another great week on the scales. Your blood pressure's lower, your blood sugar's down, your steps target has been met. You've exceeded it by 500 points. Allowing yourself to give that to yourself was a really important part of forming positive habits. So you're kind of like unraveling very bad ingrained behavior and setting down new habits. to the point where you don't think about it anymore. You just do it. You just get on your bike and ride, as someone famously said, rather than thinking you have to get your bike out today. And that's kind of what I'm like now, really. It's just I more naturally live a more naturally active life.
So you don't find it too much of a problem to maintain this lifestyle now that you've lost the weight?
I know I still struggle with it. I mean, you still gotta be conscious of it. And I've actually, I mean, like, like the many tens of millions of people in the country, I found lockdown very, very difficult. Partly because it broke the routines and habits I'd really formed, and partly because it's just very hard to stay. If you've got to stay in your home and you can only go out for an hour for your walk, which was lockdown 1 essentially, if people can remember that far back. I know the rules have changed a lot. It's actually hard to do what you have to do. And even though I tried to mix it up, the first lockdown I was doing Joe Wicks with my daughter remotely. But I mean, there's only so many bunny hops you can do around your living room when you're 53. I mean, even if you try and make it fun. So this is why what I would say, the maintenance, I should probably write a bit more about this bit actually, because the maintenance, once the trouble with diets is you achieve a goal and then people move on. And I don't want to do that. I want to be active. I want people to be active. So I kind of mixed it up, and I've got mutual support groups. So my pop club membership, we formed this group. It was just, it came out of Facebook, where I just said, look, I want to do this run. Will my friend, you're my friend, will you keep me accountable? And like dozens of friends said, well, I need to do that. Will you keep me accountable? So we've got this little site we use, this little platform we use to just encourage each other. So you still have to find techniques for keeping that going, but it's far easier when you're there. It's far easier to do it than being 22 stone and sleep deprived with Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party, and all of that stuff. I feel like I'm beyond all of that now. That's not a criticism of my former colleagues, by the way.
No. So do you ever sort of crave for the pork pie or anything, donut, or I don't know, whatever you particularly enjoyed? I mean, I know do you ever crave for it? Do you ever sort of think, oh, well, I'm just going to have one and that's it, sort of?
It's funny because when I first, I mean, I describe myself as a sugar addict, and I need that. I need to keep that in me. And again, in the book, you couldn't. There was no such thing as a single chocolate hobnob for me. If you put a packet in front of me and I ate one, I wouldn't know that I'd eaten the whole packet until there were no more biscuits for me to eat. And I now know that was a powerful addiction to sugar. And I'd probably had 25 years where I was on 3-hour sugar spikes and drops, and a lot of my subconscious mental activity was thinking about where I'd get my next dose of sugar. I don't get that anymore. I do, there are whole aisles in supermarkets that are lost to me now. In fact, you'd go into a supermarket when you get yourself off sugar, and you think, you could put all the things I need in a quarter of this shop, quarter of the space. And I used to go past food and feel hungry and almost salivate when I'd look at those products. I don't do that anymore now. On pork, I laughed at pork pies. We've got a butcher where I've moved back to near my hometown. He's a great butcher, and he does these massive pork pies. And the people I share this house with love these pork pies. So occasionally I'll take the meat out of the middle and let them have the extra pastry. I know that sounds disgusting, right? But so I've got little hacks like that. But I'm pretty disciplined. If I have chocolate, I have 80% cocoa and above. And I love that Montezuma 100% chocolate, which when I was a sugar addict would have been like tasting gravel. But I think your taste buds change again when you come off sugar. It's like you can feel more complex tastes, deeper and richer. And so I think I've probably something's happened to my taste palette that's changed now that I'm healthier and off sugar. But I can't, I couldn't eat a donut. I'd be too worried about eating that now. And I don't miss it. I do miss drinking Guinness. I still miss drinking Guinness, but I've not drunk Guinness for 3.5 years.
Oh, do you drink white spirits or to keep you?
Occasionally, yeah. I don't. I mean, my alcohol intake. I didn't give up alcohol. I just gave up the alcohol with sugar in it. But the effect of doing that is you just end up drinking a lot less. So I never realised I could enjoy vodka soda lime 4 years ago. But that's basically my choice of drink now. And it does cause you slight difficulties, like your tolerance to alcohol plummets when you lose 8 stone and you go on a ketogenic diet. So there were a few occasions where I'd think, I'd feel drunk like I was a teenager drunk, and that that actually slightly freaked me out in the early days of this journey. So I'm very careful about how I do, what I drink now, only because I don't want to look like an idiot.
No, quite. So what advice would you give to someone who's just been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes?
I get a lot of emails about this. I mean, my first thing I usually say is don't panic. Don't panic, and that it is highly likely that you can reverse this condition. You can certainly reduce the amount of blood sugar you've got running around your blood, but what you have to do, I think I'd indicated earlier, there are lots of academic, quasi-academic arguments about the best way for people to get their health back, but the one thing that unites everyone in this debate is we have too much sucrose in our diet. And so the first thing I say to people is don't panic, you can get your health back, but you've got to stop taking sugar in your diet. And that's a lot harder for people than they're given credit for, because there's hidden sugar in everything, so there's a labeling issue. You buy one of those pieces of cold chicken in Marks and Spencer for your lunch, and it's coated in brown sugar. So there's there's just a whole series of foodstuffs you've got to be very careful about if you take it seriously, and it's very hard. The chances are, if you are diagnosed with type 2, the chances are you've got sugar cravings, and when you've had a sugar drop, you've probably been putting sugary products in yourself to get your blood sugars back up. When you first try and break that cycle, it's very hard, but it's fantastically powerful, and it's the way you can start your journey into remission, I think.
So we've been seeing you more and more on TV, including the ITV series Don't Rock the Boat.
Yeah.
What's next for you?
Well, I did Don't Rock the Boat. Was about the maddest thing I've ever done. And if I'd have actually asked the questions you're supposed to ask when a TV company invite you to row the length of Britain in an ocean-going rowing boat, I'd have probably said no. But as it was during the lockdown and I was getting sick of Joe Wicks, I thought, yeah, well, you can only do your best, can't you? So I rowed the length of Britain. This year, I've published another book, which is my first work of fiction, called The House, which is a political thriller. There may be a version 2 of that. I don't know. So I'm enjoying writing books. I'm enjoying making telly. One of the great things about the job when you're a politician, there's highs and lows in politics, but you meet the world's greatest minds. You meet really interesting, curious, eccentric, intellectually gifted, brilliantly creative people. But you don't get a lot of time to talk to them because you're usually so busy. So I'm going back to all these really interesting people I've met, and I'm having conversations with them I've set up a little podcast called Persons of Interest. And there's a whole load of eclectic characters I've got in there, from Eddie Izzard, who gave me advice on how to run a marathon, which I still haven't done, and that slightly freaks me out thinking about it, to Ned Palmer, who is the country's most knowledgeable cheesemonger, who took me through 1,000 years in the history of cheese. And so if I could keep interviewing great people like that next year, 2021 will have been worth it.
Yeah, we know Ned. He did a fantastic event for us.
Did he? Oh, he's a lovely.
And he brought all his cheeses, and we had all these wonderful samples. It was a fantastic evening.
Oh, well, let me tell you about Ned. So Ned, I mean, he got me so obsessed with this. I live in Worcestershire, and I thought, well, why are there hardly any cheese makers in Worcestershire when in Herefordshire, there's cheese galore in Herefordshire? Why have we lost out? And so he had me emailing the archivist in Worcestershire Library to try and find out whether there are any sort of ancient documents that talked about cheese making in Worcestershire. Because I just thought, if we've got a county cheese that died out because of the Milk Marketing Board, I won't ruin the plot line of his very knowledgeable book. We could recreate a Worcestershire cheese, and I could become a cheesemonger and a cheese maker in my semi-retirement from politics. So I might, maybe 2021 is the year I'm going to do that.
Lovely. That's good. Well, I've got loads of absolutely amazing questions. So, are you okay if we?
Sure. Yeah. Far away.
There's absolutely loads. So, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to get around to everybody, but interesting one here from William Whiting. What can be done in schools to address obesity in children to avoid obesity in later life?
William, that's a great question. In fact, one of the great things that comes out of schools in Southwark in London, actually, is a thing called Fizz-Free February. Because what really struck me when I looked at the figures, 4 out of 10 kids leave primary school and go to high school either obese or overweight. And if you follow the timeline, that means that they're going to get type 2 diabetes. If they carry on the trajectory that most people do, they'll get type 2 diabetes earlier in life. In fact, I can't remember the numbers, but we're getting teenagers diagnosed with type 2 diabetes now. So for me, school meals, school breakfast and school lunches are key. And bizarrely, school lunches are quite well regulated. There's quite a lot of direction on what nutrition, what the nutritional composition of the food should be. But schools can still sell snacks at playtime. So you could get a donut at 10:30 at playtime and eat a salad at lunchtime, and that's okay. Well, it's not okay, is it? So I think reducing, public education and greater support for nutrition at a school level is really important. And there's so many pieces of hard research that link learning and nutrition, your ability to lay down knowledge and to form memory as a result of healthy eating, that I think there's actually a productivity issue here as well. And then the other thing, just on exercise, nutrition's the most important bit. But exercise is key as well. And there is a brilliant initiative called the Daily Mile. In fact, a school in my old constituency won an award from the Daily Mile. This is kids, you don't have to get changed into PE kit, playtime or first thing in the morning, just running around the field for a mile each day. And I did it with the kids in one of my local schools. And I defy anyone not to be smiling when you've run around a field with 40 kids. The teachers do it as well in there. The head teacher took his jacket off and we ran around together. I think more active lives in school and better nutrition.
Great. Okay, so it was here. So from an anonymous attendee, if I may ask, did you present any sort of complications with the diabetes, such as retinopathy or kidney problems? And were you able to reverse these if you did?
Kidney, thankfully my kidney function was fine. It is okay asking these questions, and these are the sort of, when these are questions on day one you want to know about when you're diagnosed, and you don't get all this. I still have an annual diabetic screening for my eyes, although that's actually slightly delayed as a result of COVID at the moment. And there was slight damage, slight retinal damage, but not enough to affect my overall vision. And so even though you can reverse the condition, I'm at a point where the clinical advice is you need to keep monitoring it. But nothing has changed since I stopped taking sugar, because you actually get that retinal damage. What that really is your body can't process the sugar well enough. It can't put any more in the blood, so it puts it in places it's not supposed to go, and it puts it in your feet and toes, and it puts it in your eyeball, and that's what does damage. So yes, there was slight damage, but it's okay now, and it's not deteriorating.
Good. Okay, I've got a political question because we haven't done any politics yet. So if I may be able to ask a political question, how do you feel about the jobs that Keir Starmer is doing, and Labour's chances in 2024? Are you concerned that Labour won't be able to recapture votes in Scotland, and the possibility of Scotland going independent, and the impact this would have on the Labour Party electorally across the UK?
That's about 20 questions, but
anyway, Tracy.
Yeah, no, well. Firstly, the one thing I'll say is, I've got to thank Jeremy Corbyn for allowing me to leave politics, i.e., removing that date. I've been talking a lot about the inner voices in my head here tonight, Cheryl. I hope people don't think, this is. I don't mean to sound like that, but that kind of minute by minute obsession I had with politics and policy and Parliament has gone. So like the rest of the population now, I feel like I'm looking in at politics rather than being a participant in it now. But I've been, and I'm glad about that, because I wouldn't want to be an MP at the moment. I mean, I feel sorry for MPs on both sides of the House of Commons having to contend with a global pandemic and Brexit, no matter what your view on that was. These are really unprecedented times. And Keir Starmer, I was almost emotional when he won. I was pleased for him, and I thought he was the right candidate for the job. And I think he's proven himself. I think he has great integrity, and people can see he says what he thinks, and he's doing his best. And that's all you can do when you've had an election defeat the size of Labour's at the last election. When I saw that result on the election night, I thought it would be impossible for Labour to form a government after only one election, because the scale, the mountain that has to be climbed is enormous. But actually, I think it is possible now. It'd be very difficult, but I think it is possible, because I think people respect Keir's leadership, and also I think for many people that election was the lowest common denominator. They didn't really positively buy into anyone. They just voted for what they thought was the least worst option. And I don't mean that I don't mean to decry everyone in that. So I think it will be a more volatile election in 2024, 2025 than perhaps people thought last December. But there's a long way to go. And there's a lot. I mean, there's a grueling march ahead for Keir and his team. They have my sympathy.
Okay, so Emma says, the whole evening's so interesting. Thank you very much. So did you get medical supervision when you first embarked on your exercise nutrition regime, or did you do it solo?
No, in the end.
Another question as well, which says, how did that first week feel like? How did that, literally the first few days, what was it like? I think they sort of kind of meld into each other, those questions.
Yeah, I mean, I was a bit like, I took it in the book, I said, I feel like, looking back at it, I felt a bit like Adrian Mole, very naive. I actually corresponded with my GP, right? My GP would occasionally send me mildly truculent notes to say, I've just seen your weigh-in with the nurse, and it's not good enough. And when I finally committed, I wanted to. I had a sort of correspondence discussion with him about ultra low calorie diets, 800 calories a day, and I literally sent him the research papers for him to read, and because I'm a bit obsessive like that. And then in the end, I went back to him and said, look, I think I want to do it this way, but the reason I want to go through it with you is I'm going to defy public health guidance. And despite what you say about politicians, they tend to be evidence-led, even though it doesn't look like that very often. And I thought if I'm going to defy what Public Health England are saying in terms of the balance of macronutrients, carbohydrates, protein, and fats, I want good old Dr. Nazir to know I'm doing it and to monitor me to make sure this doesn't go wrong. He must have thought I'd lost my marbles, the idea that I'd have that kind of obsessional conversation with him. So yes, I did, and he kept an eye on my blood sugars and my blood pressure. And when I'd actually got my HbA1c into the normal range, he was as emotional as I was. He hugged me. He gave me a little hug, and he's a lovely man. And that first week, there was a lot of emotion that first week, because I'd kind of, firstly, I knew it felt like it was last roll of the dice. I felt like I was climbing off the rock bottom. But I was also incredibly buoyant, because I'd spent years reading. That moment I was ready for it, and I was excited. And I'd kind of done it. I didn't make a song and dance about it to everyone around me. Although I'd committed to it, I'd had so many failures over the years. I didn't think people would really believe me. That I was really committing to it. And so, I think after day 3 or 4, the scale, things started to move around a bit. It was just joyous. And that whole pit, when I lost 50 pounds, see, I got a couple of team members who were particularly supportive, and Joe Dalton, who basically used to cover for me when I was in the park walking, and I should have been at the Shadow Cabinet or whatever. When I lost 50 pounds, she started to well up, because she'd been so worried about me. She started to well up. So there's a lot of emotions in a journey like this that, again, it's only in hindsight you can realize of what a roller coaster it is. But it is a great feel. If there's people on the call now that are really thinking about it, it's worth it. It's worth putting the time in. It's worth organising, blocking out the things that give you the time to do this properly. And I could only do it. It felt like I was in a struggle. It was kind of like hour by hour at the start, and then day by day. And now I can have a good month and a bad month, a more normal range of activities. But keeping a grip on it at the start is how you change. You change your lifestyle. I said it was an everyman journey. I'm sure I'm not saying anything revelatory here, other than from my experience, it's really worth finding the time to do these things as early as you can, and to do it properly, because there's just a million benefits you don't comprehend until they happen to you.
Mm-hmm. Someone here says, hi Tom, is there any way we can reach out to you with further questions? There's so much I want to ask you about your fight with diabetes, and also what I can do. So I suppose there's something other than tonight. Have you got a website, or is there any
I'm on most of the social media channels, so Google me, or if you follow up afterwards, I can give you all that stuff. If I'd got my act together, or if there's anyone from my team on here, they might be able to put it in the chat room, the website and my Twitter handles and all of that. But I'm not sure who's on the call. But we can follow up after, if that's okay. Yeah.
Lovely. Harry Picken says, hi Tom, I read your book at the beginning of the first lockdown in March and have since lost 7.5 stone. I completely submerged myself in the world of ketogenic dieting and want to thank you for giving me the springboard to change my life. My question is, did you stick to ketogenic dieting even after you hit your target weight, or did you slowly reintroduce small amounts of carbohydrates back into your diet? Many thanks from Southwest London.
Harry, that's a great thanks. That's made my day to hear that. And if you've lost 7.5 stone, I know how you'll be feeling $1 million, won't you? It'd be fantastic. And on keto, see, when you get the weight off, you know, it's not just losing the weight, it's kind of finding an emotional and mental bandwidth where you're kind of in control. So you know that you know, you can have a glass of wine on a Friday night without thinking you're going to spiral out and you'll fall off the wagon. So I was very, very disciplined, ruthlessly disciplined for the first period. And if you've lost 7.5 stone since March, you've probably been the same as well, I can tell. When I sort of hit what you'd say sort of maintenance level, I'm still very low carb. So when I think I'm having a carby day, normal people would think that's still very low carb. So, you know, I don't eat chips, I don't eat white pasta. You know, I may occasionally have a sweet potato these days. I may, you know, but you know, I prefer cauliflower rice to any rice at all. So I occasionally have a few more carbs, but I very rarely do. And I say carbs is everyone needs carbs in their diet, and I'm overgeneralizing. What I mean is those kind of starchy, the sort of normal carbs we know, white, you know, beigey pastas and stuff. I don't allow myself to do that anymore. No. You know, so whenever my kids want pizza or spaghetti, it does my head in. So I even have courgette now. I've got a little spiralizer, and if you've never made courgette before, basically use 2 courgettes, not 1, even though it looks massive when you first do it. It like boils down in the pan really quickly. So and it's gorgeous though. Courgette with pasta sauce on is fantastic. Anyway, I'm sorry. You can tell I've not had my tea yet, can't you? I'm thinking
No, neither have I. Sounds amazing. I'm starving.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is an interesting one from Hannah. Such an amazing achievement, Tom. A couple of questions. Do you think your personality has changed since losing weight? And after your impressive row around the coast of Britain, do you feel the need to set yourself more physical challenge to make up for all the years you missed out on?
Yes, I do think I've changed actually, and this is the bit I've wrestled with. Because I don't know whether it's because of the old job I'd used to do, but I used to be triggered about 20 times a day, right? That means my fight or flight responses were triggered, which I now know is like cortisol shooting through my veins, hardening my arteries and shortening my life. And yet, for about the last year of being deputy leader of the Labour Party, you know, there were people like Len McCluskey moving rule changes at the Labour Party conference to abolish my post, and like, you know, it was very, very stressful. It was a stress environment. But for the last year in post, I don't think I'd lost my temper once. I don't think I was triggered once. So I feel like a much calmer, more reflective person as a result of changing my diet, which again, in hindsight, is probably obvious, isn't it? We are what we eat, really, or what you put in yourself. What I haven't worked out yet is, did it turn me into someone who was too chilled out for politics? Did it stop me being able to be what a politician has to be in order to be effective? I don't know that. All I know is I'm the happiest I've ever been, despite walking away from a moderately high profile role. Sorry, there was a few questions there. What was the other bit?
About the rowing.
The rowing. Yeah. So the rowing thing.
Yourself another big challenge.
Yeah, I do want another big challenge. There's a few little things. There's a lot I want to do actually. I would like to learn to ski. I still haven't got my level 2 gym instructor qualification, mainly because even though I did the training, you need to build a portfolio up, and you know, the gyms have been closed, and you know, it's not greatly conducive to show people how to do the military press in the middle of a pandemic. And then next year, my friend, he's mentioned in the book, my friend Andrew Denton, who basically persuaded me to get on a bike again after 35 years. He runs the Outdoor Industry Association, which are the people who want us to have active lives outdoors. He's saying we need to do a proper bike challenge next year, and I think there's an organised bike ride for the Surrey Hills, which is a bike ride where you have to do a lot of pedalling uphill. And I've stupidly agreed to do that with him towards the end of next year. And I'm regretting it because my other friend, DJ Collins, he persuaded me to do Zwift, which is this where you can pedal your bike indoors on a digital screen. And they've got a virtual Surrey Hills bike ride. And I'd agreed to do this until I tried the virtual bike ride. And doing the virtual bike ride, I felt it was like the first time I walked up the steps in the House of Commons. I thought I'm going to have to call an ambulance here. So anyway, I know I'm waffling tonight, but I'm having such good fun with you, Cheryl. Right? But so basically, another bike ride next year. Maybe learn to ski. Definitely, I've got to get back in the gym and start building my portfolio. And who knows what comes next? I'd like to be able to experience living an active life and maybe help, through the podcast and my writing, give people a little flavour of what you can do in your 50s without looking like an idiot.
Oh, well, you never look that. Never look that.
Definitely. Well, you never saw Don't Rock the Boat. I looked. Don't Rock the Boat was like that was. I don't advise doing that again.
Well, I think our time is up. Thank you, Tom, so much. And thank you everybody for joining in with such brilliant questions. There are more, but we have to draw a line under it. And I think we've covered most of the topics anyway. Now.
Well, I think Cheryl, if people want to drop their email to you, I can pick up. I'll pick up the other questions offline tomorrow or later tonight if that's okay. Yeah.
So if anybody wants to email either Hazel or myself, then that's absolutely fine. At Chorleywood Bookshops or Village Books. Yeah, and then we'll send them on to the publicist, and we can send them on that way.
That'd be great.
So it's been brilliant. So the book, which some people have got in their ticket, mustn't lose sight of the book, is going to be plated signed, $8.99, and it's available from two particularly good bookshops. One in Village Books and in Chorleywood Bookshop and Gerrards Cross Bookshop, of course.
I'm just looking at you two holding that up. I've not got a copy of the paperback yet, so that's the first time I've seen it.
Oh yeah, because it's different. The hardback's the white, and
it looks beautiful. That's great.
It looks great.
Thank you.
Yeah, you pleased with that? No, it's good, isn't it?
I have to buy a copy off you. I promise I won't do it on Amazon.
I'll send you one.
Thanks.
So thank you, Tom. Thank you for such a great evening, and for your, for being so honest and open, and sort of discussing very personal things. And I think you're really inspiring people to lose weight and get a grip, and do what they need to do. Really, it's amazing, and that's the inspiration. So thank you so much, and thank you, Hazel, and all your and all your lovely people for joining us tonight. It's been great, lovely. So thank you, Tom.
All right, and Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks for your time.
You can take your Christmas tree down now, Tom.
In January. I'm more traditional than that. I know everyone says it's bad luck, but anyway, there you go.
Okay. Night.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.